time in Leuven, but my first time in Belgium, as I look over the group, I see maybe one or two people whose parents might have been born before I first came to Belgium, but it was a long time ago. I'm very old. Actually, my first visit to Belgium was in the summer of 1958. Now, I was a student wandering about, and at that was the summer of the Brussels World's Fair with the big atom, the big stainless steel atom, and so on. And I want to mention that because that was also a very interesting summer in modern history. And the adjective for the history is one of the things I want to talk about, because I paused. You know, it's a very interesting summer in history. I was just entering a graduate program, a master's program in Middle Eastern Studies at that point. And it was the summer, the first summer of the Union of Egypt and Syria, the United Arab Republic under Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was the summer in July when radical Arab socialist military officers overthrew the Hashemite monarchy of Iraq. It was a summer in which you were having a lingering effect of a civil war in Lebanon. It was a fun time to be studying, it was a fun time to be studying the Middle East. It was not necessarily a good time to be sort of a citizen in the Middle East. But as I look back at the headlines of 1958, it has an important sort of lesson for us for this subject here. Islamic revivalism, contemporary Muslim thinkers, and governance, postmodern and modern governance. Quite frankly, 50 years ago, when I did my math, how many are doing a thesis? When I did my master's thesis, this subject would have been impossible. It was difficult for me when I started doing my dissertation, or when I did my master's thesis on the Senussia Tariqa in the Sudan, in Libya. It was difficult to persuade the people there, my advisors, that I should have anything to do with the Senussia and that sort of thing, because everybody knew that religion was on its way out. Why don't you write on something that will have long-term significance, like Arab leftist socialism? Well, I was lucky. I believed in belief. But it's a reminder that there has been a transformation. And there's a picture that, as I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, there's a picture that popped up on my Google as I was searching. And it's, again, one of those, this is impossible 50 years ago. Who would have thought, first, that there would have been Muhajiba women who would have a French poster? In those days, the women who were covered were viewed as, quote, traditional. They were viewed as the people that needed to be modernized. And so as we look at this, picture for a moment, it raises a set of issues that mean that our subject, I keep going back and forth. I'm not very good at PowerPoint in the sense that I don't have a sequence. But here, the first real problem that I had then with this, what from my graduate student days would have been an impossible subject, is what kind of a title do I want? And what I really want to talk about is this. But I want to remind you that when we talk about Islamic revivalism in the 21st century, when we talk about Islamic revivalism in the postmodern religious era, in the post-secular, it's post-everything that we live in today. But as we live then in this post-everything world, Islamic revivalism is not what most scholarship talks about when they write an article or when they publish a book on Islamic revivalism. The Islamic revivalism in the books and in the most of the articles that you see and so on is still talking about what we might call modern Islamic revivalism. The thing that gets the label political Islam. The thing that looks like sort of the Ayatollah Khomeini without a black robe and in Sunni garb. The thing that is oriented toward the nation state. Now, all of those terms are very important political terms, or very important analytical terms. But they're not necessarily effective terms for 21st century analysis. Mika and I were talking about sort of what we're looking at. When we're talking about Islamic revival, we were talking about it in Morocco. I'm an old-fashioned teacher, I still can't use this. The Sufi dimension of contemporary Islamic revival is very important. But even in a place like Egypt, with all sorts of political implications for religious identification, where the largest Islamic organizations are not the Muslim Brotherhood, they are the Sufi tariqas. Do a Google search on Sufism in Egypt in the 21st century, and you won't find much. Do a Google search on Salafis, the rigid old-fashioned fundamentalists, and you'll get lots of stuff. So my choice here, and looking at Islamic revivalism, the first thing I want us to realize is that Islamic revivalism in its 21st century form is not what most people think of when they think about political Islam or Salafism or Wahhabism. Now, I'm going to try and stop talking so that we have plenty of time for questions. And I'm happy to talk about militant Wahhabi, intellectually Wahhabi Salafism and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and so on. That's one of the disadvantages of having been a world history teacher. You can talk about anything and everything. You may not be able to say much about it, but you can sure talk about everything. But we can talk about this. But what I want us to talk about is the non-Wahhabi, non-Salafi Islamic revivalism that I think is the most important intellectual and religious, social and political development in the contemporary Islamic world. And for me, the Islamic world is everything. That is, it's not just from Senegal to Indonesia, but it's from Chicago to Leuven and to Tokyo. So the alternative title might be, Islamic revivalism, the non-well-known, non-militant crew. And so as we look then, the definition of the lecture series deals with governance. And if we're talking about Muslims and religion and governance, the term that we have to look at is secularism. And what is going on with secularism? Now, the title that we had, that you have, could have been the secular Muslim thought, but that would have been old. And again, I was asking whether I could give you a horrible new word. What I'm really going to conclude, and then you can forget the word, but what I'm really going to conclude is that we are in an era our postmodern era is a time when the old idea of the opposition and antagonism between secular and religious has been dissipated, so that we see the religionization of the secular and the secularization of the religious. Now, I'll stick with that, but in my own mind, I say, okay, we've got a new phenomenon. We're no longer dealing with secularism. We're no longer dealing with religiosity. We are dealing with secularism. Forgive me for the horrible word. And actually, the other term that's even more clunky, we are now no longer dealing with necessarily national secularious identity, but secularious or secular religious hyphenated is a transnational, maybe even a post-national identity in which the global and the local are mixed. And some of you in the sociology of religion may have come across Roland Robertson's another ugly term like secularism. He says that we are living in a world in which the global and the local are synthesized, and so what does he call it? Glocal. And so if you want a quick summary of everything I'm going to say in the next now, say half hour or so, what I'm going to talk about is the emergence, you've got glocal, you've got this, of glocal secularism. Now, this is glocal secularism as we look at it. And as we look at some of our debates then, as we start with the debate, as we look at France, as we look at Turkey, as we look at Egypt, as we look at Bosnia, there is real debate about secularism and secularization and so on. But it's a new kind of debate. The real debates, we'll talk about this some more, the real debates are not over secular versus something else, but what kind of secular. And so that as we look at this picture, we have conflicting visions, really. You have the secularism that gets in a lot of the literature and in a lot of political programs, the French label laïcité. You have laïcité is religion as personal and out of the public square. Whereas you have the alternative, which is the institutional, functional definition, in which you have a separation of religious institutionalization, a separation of religious institutions from the state, but freedom to practice religion in the public square. And so that the issue is, what is the place of religion in the public square? And we can see here, as I discovered this picture, the New York Times had a very interesting article just last week, February 6th, and the headline was, "Old Tradition of Secularism Clashes with France's New Reality." And one might say old traditions of secularism clash with Belgium's new reality, with America's new reality, with Germany's new reality. And the lead paragraph, laïcité, the concept of state secularism, is a defining principle of the French Republic, right up there with the national motto of liberté, égalité, and fraternity. Developed in the French Revolution, which targeted the Roman Catholic Church, laïcité governs the public life of a nation that sharply delineates the realms of Caesar and God. Now, religion is not supposed to then be in the public square. And it hits at all levels of life. Whether, how do you practice religion as a personal or as a public manifestation of identity. And again, you know, I'm stuck with the New York Times, for better or for worse. And again, there's a lovely new kind of comment about French politics from last fall, or from last December. And the headline, "In France, politics are served in a pita." And it talks about the emergence of kebabophobia. You know, some of us have dealt with Islamophobia. Well, Elaine Chilino, in this lovely article on the French first acceptance of and love of good, flavorful kebab, but now you get the right wing being opposed to kebab as being against French traditions and so on. And so you have kebabophobia. Now, whether you're talking about kebab, whether you're talking about scarves, whether you're talking about what courses are in education, this isn't a battle between religion on the one side and non-religion on the other. It is a battle between people who have different ideas about secularism and secularization. Now, this battle is not just a French battle. It is a debate within the Muslim world as well. But let us just look for perspective at the moment at what I would call the modern battle, which was the old-fashioned battle. When I was a graduate student, Peter Berger, a major sociologist of religion, was quite firm in his analysis of the future of religion. And that was simple. It didn't have any future. In 1968, Berger says, by the 21st century, religious believers are likely to be found only in small sects huddled together to resist a worldwide secular culture. And so in that context, secular versus religion was the debate or the tension between modernity, viewed as necessarily secular, and religion, viewed as necessarily traditional. That they could not meet, as one study from the time, the Passing of Traditional Society by Daniel Lerner said, basically Muslims will have to decide whether they have to choose between Mecca and mechanization, between religion and modern industrial society. I can remember early on in my career being interested in the sociology of religion and having a conference of sociologists of religion. And the theme of the